Welcome to the Zachrilege cast. Jessica, Bluemke, Greiff, how's it going?
Oh, it's going pretty well. Just having a glass of wine. Thought I was on a podcast for the last 10 minutes, but I wasn't. I was just talking, I guess, to you.
It was
I suppose.
warm up, yeah.
So it was all my personal podcasting, I guess.
Yeah, I was just hoping for the big $1 million atheist. I think it's Atheist Day, although it's like one of those hashtags. So I have no idea if there's an international sanction involved. It's always Happy Cat or Dog Day, but it's April.
Yeah, I
March
think I saw
23rd.
Like Dogs for Choice or something like that was happening today, or pro-choice dogs. So I got on board with that right quick.
Okay, so you're with me tonight. You're on the drinking, so I'm having a Monday night bourbon barrel aged drafty kilt, and in my left hand, the regular drafty kilt. Just to so
I am
it's regular
Farmhouse Cabernet. It had a screw top in case I don't finish the bottle tonight. So that was why I picked it.
Nice. Well, we'll see how that goes because you get to do all the talking tonight. So we're going to start with a couple of out of context quotes, and then we'll get started. The first one is, "Am I a think tank?"
Okay. This was it. So you're very lucky I remember this because there's been a couple people who will like tweet or email quotes that I said, and I'm like, I fully black out when I'm recording. I remember very little of what I say. I think I'm a think tank came from the Falwell and Falkirk, the Falkirk Liberty University think tank, and I just sort of floated the question: can anything be a think tank? If people are just sitting around talking, is that a think tank? And thereby, legally, I'm a think tank. So nobody answered that. So I think legally the answer is yes. And yes, I usually drink boxed wine as well, Jane, but my box was tapped today. So I opened a bottle like a real classy lady.
Had to go for the good stuff. One of the finest Illinois wine. And the second one is, "Keep your fucking distance from me, men in general."
I think that's just good advice. I don't like my space crowded, and the people who often crowd my space are men. I want them to get the fuck out of my face.
Well, if you're doing a podcast, as you are doing, you're going to hear lots of stories about religion, and clearly religion is a lot of men behaving badly or getting a free pass for acting the way they were. But we wanted to start this episode with like your superhero origin story. So what was like your religious background?
None, not. So both my folks grew up Catholic. My dad is Irish Catholic. My mom is Italian, so Roman Catholic. And my dad hated church, so that ran in the family. So my dad stopped going to church. He hated CCD. He hated the whole pile of bullshit. So he stopped going as soon as he could, which I just learned recently caused a pretty big rift with his very religious his religious mother, my grandmother. My mom, similar, but just sort of stopped going to. I don't even know how much they went to church as young people, but the point is, they, despite the fact that they got married in a Catholic church, I think. They did not raise. I have an older brother. They did not raise either of us as a religion. I just sat down and interviewed my father this past weekend when I was visiting him, because he was a lifelong Republican who is now a staunch Democrat and a volunteer with the Joe Biden campaign. So I just wanted to talk to him about that a little bit. And he recounted one of my favorite stories, which is the fact that my brother and I were baptized in the Catholic Church because my grandmother, his mother, threatened to kidnap me and my brother and have us baptized. And so he thought, if this thing's going to happen, I might as well have some control over it. No real religion in my house. I grew up in a very Catholic part of the Chicago suburbs. A lot of Irish Catholic folks were bopping around there and still are, I suspect. And actually, it gave me sort of a weird understanding of religion, because when you don't grow up in it, and nobody who I spent time with was that serious about religion, I, for a long time, did not understand its importance in a lot of people's lives, which maybe is why I was always pretty loose with those kinds of things. But I genuinely did not know, this is gonna make me sound very naive, but I genuinely did not know people didn't believe in evolution until I was in college, until I was a senior in college. Because it just never occurred to me to ask. And this is before, there was Facebook, but it was back when Facebook was, you're just bullshitting with your friends at college, and not the sort of news aggregate monster it is now. So yeah. And kind of the older I got, I declared myself an atheist when I was like a junior in college, because I read there's a short story, and I'm not a short story, a sermon. It's called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And I cannot think of the author off the top of my dome, but he's a pretty prominent 17th century American pastor. I get this mixed up still. And essentially it was just a sermon about how, like, you're all terrible. I hate all of you. Go to church. Repent. And I was like, well, this sucks. Why would anybody be on board for this? This is absolutely terrible. And so that was kind of when I drew the line, that I was like, yeah, I'm going to full on, say many. And this was 2006, 2007. So that was when that happened. And then kind of genuinely, like, what got me more interested in atheist activism was Hemant's blog. I started reading it in 2011 when it was pretty new still. And obviously briefly before I started writing for it myself. And he just approached things in a way that I really appreciated, that were not kind of over the top, were in a very specific way of like those were back in the day when the big thing, like obviously like trap laws, the anti-abortion laws were happening, but it was a lot of shit like this guy said atheists aren't real Americans, or we put a nativity scene in a publicly owned piece of land, and he did a very good job of saying, like, here's why this matters. And yeah, so that sort of got me more engaged. And then I went to Reason Rally in 2012. And shortly thereafter, I started writing for the blog, and it's kind of all snowballed from there. So yeah, I think it's a point worth making that I am not a scholar of religion or any, I was a lit major and studied anthropology. But I'm not, I learned everything I learned just by keeping my, nose to the grindstone and reading a ton and learning about what's going on. And so I always say that just because I'm not any smarter than anybody else, I just have this platform and I happen to be good at talking off the cuff. So I don't want people to think I'm some person who is smarter or better than them. I'm just louder.
I think 366 episodes of a podcast, you qualify as a scholar.
I'm waiting for
sorts.
I'm waiting for my internet doctorate in the mail.
There you go. Okay, so you found Hemant Mehta initially online. Mm-hmm. How did the two of you kind of get together, and what led to the beginning of the Friendly Atheist podcast? By the way, 366 episodes this week. Congrats.
Thank you. So when I wrote in with my submission, so I wrote like 2 pieces to submit to, like, just for writing samples. So he said, yeah, great, come on in. And it was very quick, and it was just genuinely, he read my writing and thought it was good and brought me on. It was really no more like exciting or sexy than that. And then shortly thereafter, he called me. And that was still the moment that I was like, oh, Hemant's calling me. Like Hemant Mehta from the Friendly Atheist, he's calling me. And he had Cubs tickets that he had extras. And so he invited me and my husband, my then boyfriend, but my husband along. He just had bleacher seats. And so we kind of hung out there. And the fact that I lived in Chicago and he lived in the suburbs of Chicago was handy. And I have to make this full screen because I'm reading the comments and I'm not going to, my ADD is going to go wild. So
do not, feel free to not answer any questions about deep dish pizza or hot dogs in the
thing is, I do want to talk about
we have a Chicago
pizza and hot
connection.
dogs.
Yeah. In the chat.
But anyway, so, and so we became friendly that way. Friendly Atheist. And then we would just if I was out here, we would get dinner once in a while. And then I used to play in a poker game out in the suburbs once a month. And so I started bringing him to those because he's a really good poker player. I don't like that he's beaten me twice. It genuinely upsets me. And so one day this is going to be a really sexy story. We were at a Chili's. And I was drinking a margarita and I was like, Hammett, let's do a podcast. I love podcasts. And that was genuinely it. It was just me bullying him until he kowtowed to my will, I guess. So yeah, then we started as just we started as an interview podcast. So because he had connections to the atheism world, etc., he was able to queue up some good guests for us. We did that for years, probably 2 years. And then when I came out, I moved from uptown Chicago to the western suburbs, which is where I live now and very close to where Hammett lives. And I moved out here in August 2016. And then obviously November 2016 happened and we were just texting each other. I was like, okay, I want to do XYZ. I think we should do a shitty year in review and just drink wine and bitch about what a terrible year 2016 was. And then we did a Trump's first week in office review. And then just from there, we just realized the format worked. It was fun for us to do. To me, it was much more fun to just kind of bullshit with Hammett than it was to sit down and write interview questions. That's just a preferential thing for me. And yeah, so 300 and what'd you say, 66 episodes later, we're still rocking pretty strong. It's something I'm incredibly proud of and is very meaningful, even when it feels very dumb and silly. When I'm just screaming in my kitchen about how I hate men or whatever, which is sort of my whole gimmick, So yeah, and here we are. And now I'm here, the pinnacle of my career. And
you're only finally. No one's ever said that before. I'm going to tear up, except I have no tear ducts. 300 episodes to 666. You have that in your future.
Yeah, we'll have to plan for something. Maybe we'll go somewhere.
Like that.
Yeah, we'll have to do something.
You kind of talked about this ahead of time, so you can just cue your brain back to, 10 minutes before the show started. But so how does it work now? How do you kind of divvy it up in terms of the stories that you talk about? And are you tired of talking about Christians acting badly?
Yeah, sometimes. It's not that I'm tired of Christians acting badly. I'm tired of them acting badly in the same way over and over. And I'd like them to act badly in new, interesting ways that I can be mad at. Genuinely, it's just it's the same shit. It's all of the same arguments to apply to whether it's feminism, whether it's trans rights, whether it's God in school or whatever. It's all the same thing of Christians saying that everything I think and believe is right and everybody else is wrong, and therefore everybody else has to bow to my will. And that song gets old. But you asked me so yeah, we record on Friday mornings and early afternoons, which changes based on all kinds of things. We're both pretty flexible. So it used to, in the before times, he would generally come to my place, not always, but usually came here. And I would, in advance, I send him any stories that I definitely want to cover. and just so he has them in his notes for later, and he takes notes as we write of timestamps. But for me, I really don't want to know what he's going to talk about beforehand. I would rather kind of react to things honestly. And, I stand by that. I think there are pros and cons to me reading these articles and writing down my thoughts and really trying to like get my ducks in a row. But I think that there are people who are better than that than me. And I think people come to me for a more gut instinct reaction. And yeah, so I have gotten shit before because, when you hear something that's upsetting or wrong or touches kind of close to home, I'm thinking of specifically when the Dave Silverman stuff came out. I learned about that on the air. There was Dave Silverman, and there was stuff with what's his name? Neil deGrasse Tyson, where there was some allegations there.
It's
and
like there are a lot of potential names to put in.
Oh yeah. It's not a small list. And I think it's just an honest way of saying, like, okay, when somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson gets accused of something, does that feel different? Should it feel different? My gut instincts might not be right, but that doesn't make them less true, and that doesn't mean other people aren't having them. And if I think through, I do a lot of processing out loud, which is kind of how I work anyway, which is I think why it works for the show, is that I'm a very verbal person when I'm trying to sort things out in my brain. And so yeah, I've heard people say like, oh, you didn't come down hard enough on whatever, or you were too mean to so and so. And it's like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. And nobody has to take what I say as gospel. They can make their own decision. But I like to think I have a point of view of many atheist feminist allies and hopefully do an okay job of voicing their concerns and objections and hopes and dreams and all that fun stuff.
Well, sometimes when you're doing a podcast, you just have to put out what you put out, and there will be detractors, or no one might listen. I know people in the chat room might tell me I need to smile more, but we'll make it work. So I wanted to reach back, to something you said before the show. I wanted, keep it fresh. It's all about what's new. So you just did God Awful Movies, and the episode just came out today. Now, if you listening in the podcast world, that was probably 2 days ago, but whatever. So I'm going to have to ask you about your experience, I have to throw out some bonus out of context quotes from the episode.
Oh, good.
I love terrible movies.
I do love terrible movies. It is a very true thing. My husband and I, it's just part of our jam. We've both always been like that. We have different tastes in what makes a good terrible movie. So my husband's favorite might be like an Over the Top, maybe would be his kind of go-to. Mine is more of like a Demolition Man. So both in the Sly Stallone universe, the Slyverse as I call it. But yeah, there's just
every restaurant is Taco Bell. I remember that.
Yeah. There's just something very fun about people taking big swings and failing, but like, and sometimes it's about like genuinely the bones of this movie are terrible and the writing is awful, and sometimes it's just bad acting or whatever. It's just one of those things that like few things make me happier than like having a drink and watching a terrible movie with like my husband and some friends. I've built entire weekends around it.
Well, we'll see about this movie in particular, but we still have a couple more quotes here. And just like that, it becomes a gay porn.
Yeah, I'm always hoping that any given low budge Christian movie, because like they all have kind of the same like porn and low budget Christian movies kind of had the same aesthetic of like bad lighting, bad sound. It's in like a Marriott hotel room or something like that they're pretending is somebody's bedroom. And in this movie particularly, there was just a lot of unresolved tension between our two male leads, and they spent a lot of time. And I assume this was by virtue of the director not being very good at framing shots and / or not knowing how to do like a shot reverse shot to have like two people in a conversation. So it was always two shots, right? So a two shot is like when there's just two heads in the frame, but because of whatever, they always were talking just real close to each other, just like right up on each other. And then there was two whole plot points where they're like, well, we're going to lock ourselves into this cabinet for a weekend and see what happens. And I was like, yes, I've seen this pornography. It ends with you guys fucking. And never once did they. And like, it just would have had more depth, I think, more texture.
And the last quote is, at least he's deeply embarrassed that he wanted to fuck that computer.
Yes. Okay. I'm glad you brought this up. The premise of this movie is essentially...
What was the movie? The name of it? What was it called?
It's called The God Question.
Okay.
And so it was about this supercomputer that was invented. And this guy was like, we need to get into it and have it answer the God question. AKA, is there no God? The FBI comes in and shuts shit down for a minute. I don't know why. And then, yeah. Oh, and then there's this whole thing that like the AI system starts gaining sentience and makes phone calls to like rabbis or whatever to try to ascertain the meaning of God. And so there's this sort of theme throughout the movie of technology is bad. And at one point he is booking a flight on the phone, you know, like you do in 2021. I actually think this movie's like 2014. And he immediately starts flirting with this woman he's on the phone with, and, like, is going hard, like genuinely like sits down on the bed and like this guy's about to like full on jerk it. I'm so sorry, I'm being very inappropriate for your podcast. And then he realizes and then he realizes that he's talking to like an AI bot because he says something and it like glitches, and then like a guy comes on, he's like, sorry, that was a robot, did you have any other questions? And this guy looked so, because he was literally like, so what are you doing after work? And like he was genuinely gonna try to like hook up with this bot. And so when the real human comes in and says, oh no, it's fully a computer, sir. He does look extremely embarrassed that he was going to jerk it to this robot voice. And at least he had some shame for his horrible actions. And that was the realest moment, I think, in the movie, was just like this guy heard this woman's voice. And it's just such like a male prototype of like, he just hears a woman's voice. He's like, I guess this is for me to jerk off to, because that's all that women exist for in my world. And yeah, he was deeply ashamed for wanting to fuck that robot. And I am glad of it. He learned his lesson, I hope.
So ultimately, the weird thing is, like, lately I've been seeing like the god awful movies, like they post the poster, and this movie like showed that it went to like film festivals and it won awards. And it's like, what film festivals are these movies going to? Because when you hear people talk about them, you're like, they sound like the typical kind of Christian movie that has like it's like, I've watched a lot of movies, so now I know how to do one, but I don't know how to write a script and I don't know how to act. And it just, there's a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah. I think it's in the way, you know how like basically every bottle of wine you buy says like award winner for best whatever. And it's like Barefoot wine or Yellowtail, which like, that's perfectly acceptable wine. I'm not bagging on it, but like, it's not award-winningly good. I think it's the same thing. Like if you look hard enough, you can pay somebody enough money to slap a medal on your bullshit. Like fucking PBR is Pabst Blue Ribbon because it got a blue ribbon 100 years ago among a million other beers who also got blue ribbon. They're like, no, we're running with this, and that's why we have PBR. If you dream it, you can be it. And if that means your movie is award-winning, so be it.
And this is something I've always wanted to know about, like Puzzle and a Thunderstorm experiences, because for god-awful movies, they always bring in the guest masochist, and this was your first experience. It was. So what was it like preparing for god-awful movies? And did you actually watch this movie twice? Do you want to admit that on air?
I sure did, friend. I'm willing to give you this exclusive story. That I did get a little more stoned than I intended to the first time I watched it, and taking notes became horrible. And at one point I just closed my computer and was like, that's enough. And then I kind of felt guilty the next day because I paid attention to the rest of it. I just could not make my brain both watch a movie and take notes. And so I was like, and also the ending of this movie is nothing. Like it literally, it's a man and a woman in a room.
Yeah, there are no spoiler alerts to this movie. It sounds like there's nothing to spoil.
There's literally nothing to spoil. So the whole thing is like, if this computer can prove that there is or is not a God, it might not tell them because of the dire consequences that it would inflict upon the world with this new knowledge. And so the last like 30 seconds of this movie, which I've seen 3 times because I was sure that I missed something, because I rewound it for 5 minutes. So the computer is talking to them, and then it plays a recording of something a guy said earlier that doesn't seem to matter or be anything important. And then the protagonist and his love interest just look at each other, and then it fades to black, and that's the end of the movie. And I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen a movie end so abruptly isn't even the right word, but it's just like they ran out of film and thought, yeah, this is fine. So yeah, I did go back and watch it again. Also, it's an 88-minute runtime, and like 12 of those minutes were credit. So it wasn't a huge time suck for me. And I don't know if you have a ton going on, but I do not. So yeah, I watched this terrible movie twice. I have no regrets. I didn't pay for it. I like doing analysis on stupid things because I was a lit major. So one of my favorite things in the world is to like sit down with a piece of art or a piece of media and like dive into it and find the themes that are running through it. And, oh, was this a metaphor for this? Or was this foreshadowing that? And so I very much wanted to be able to sit with them and like pitch dumb theories about why things were happening, but so little happened in this movie that it didn't help that second viewing. Nothing became more clear. If anything, it was more confusing because then when you see it because this movie has no like arc or subject or storyline, I watched it twice, and so now it's just sort of a blob in my head. It's like my friend used to always say that the song Toxic by Britney Spears, if you played it on repeat over and over again, you would never really know when it ended and when it began. That's kind of similar to this movie of like, if you put it on a loop, the order of the scenes does not matter. The progression of the plot doesn't happen. So then it just became this sort of mash of nothingness in my brain. And now I remember very little about it. It's gone.
And it was still fairly recent. So, So you were talking, maybe you mentioned on Twitter that you like did 3 podcasts last Friday, and this was one of them. So what was the recording process of actually like recording the episode and, interacting? So they're smart in Puzzle and Thunderstorm where they rotate people out so you don't have to like listen to a crazy movie every week. So it was Noah and Eli this week, but what was it like recording with those two?
Genuinely an absolute delight. I enjoyed every second of it. So I used to do stand-up comedy, and I have just a bunch of friends kind of smattered throughout the Chicago comedy scene. And there are kinds of people who are withholding of laughter and kind of act like you sort of have to earn it. Like laughing is a big compliment. And if you've listened to my podcasts, am not like that. I laugh at literally everything and I do it loudly. Part of that is left over from being a stand-up and wanting to support my fellow comics and laugh as loud as I could in the audience. Part of that is just straight up my personality. I'm just very loud. All that's to say is they were both very similar to that. They both like were very complimentary. Like even before I think Noah came on, just Eli and I, and he's like, "Oh my God, I was listening to this and you're so fun." Like they were just very generous with making me feel smart and funny, which is great because when you go in at go into a place and sort of feel intimidated, that's not going to be fun for everybody. And I think for me, the reason I like podcasts is I want to listen to people who are bright and like each other and are having fun together, and they foster that environment really, really well.
Yeah, it does seem like they have a good time recording their episodes.
And you have to. When you do stuff like that, like the second it gets not fun, it's pointless. And especially, if you have sponsors and all of a sudden it's not just a passion project, it's an obligation, it can become a job very quickly. And yeah, I recorded 3 episodes of 3 different podcasts on Friday because I spent the weekend with my folks in Wisconsin, where I incidentally interviewed my father. So that was a 4th that weekend. But I was on mic for, I think I calculated 7.5 hours. And it's exhausting because you have to be on the whole time. You have to be focused the whole time. And it's something you definitely get used to if you perform a lot, but I don't. And I found it incredibly draining. And I think everything makes me tired now that the pandemic is here. So yeah, like the fact they brought really cool, fun energy that made me feel accepted. I didn't feel like the weird guest outsider who didn't get what was going on. Like they integrated me into everything. It was a true joy. And I do hope they have me on again.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the compliments, because when I've listened to the Friendly Atheist, I've been like, your one-liners are great. It's really entertaining, that part of it. But I did want to ask this very important question about the episode. So when you prepared for the episode, did you give Crangela a backstory?
The thing is, I did just say I would like those boys to have me back on, so I'm a little wary to say this in public, although I did tell them. I've full-on cold read those. They do little interstitial scenes that they write their guests into. And they did that morning, they did send me, my lines or whatever, such as it were. But I have a full-time job and I record with him at 1 and I recorded with Hemmett from 10 to 11:30. So I didn't have a ton of time that day. And I was like, fuck, I completely forgot to read over these. So those were all read cold. And when I told them, I didn't tell them that till after we recorded. They're like, oh, that was great. I was like, oh, thank God. Could you tell us the first time I read it? And they're like, no. I was like, perfect. As long as I fooled you guys.
Yeah, that part's got to be tough because it's like ads and then little kind of, little skits in a way.
Yeah, and it's fun and it keeps the show interesting. It's
a change of pace from that movie. Probably a good idea.
And it's fun. It's the thing people don't get to do. I am not an actor by trade, but it was just sort of a fun little change of pace for me. So I enjoyed it. Just the whole experience is really nice.
So as someone who does content writing for a living, why were you particularly annoyed by the movie's bad use of Cryons?
So
that's first for a good sigh.
So, okay, to give context to your question, they did a lot of exposition in this movie called The God Question. They did a lot of exposition dumps via our main character watching the news or our main character overhearing other people talking about the news. And so this one in the morning, he was drinking his coffee and was and it was this whole AI thing. So it's a faux Siri. It's like, Siri, turn around to XYZ. And so they showed this news footage of whatever the fuck was going on with this computer that MIT built and the FBI is mad about and et cetera, et cetera. And so the entire time for authenticity, I guess, they had these little Cryons running in the bottom, which normally because here's the very dumb, annoying part. It's not even a crawler, a crawler across the bottom of the screen that has sports updates or whatever. Cryons are usually reserved for explaining what you're looking at on the TV. Instead, this one was just random stories that had no place in Cryons, and they were poorly written. So the one I remember was Cryons was something to the extent of vehicle chase in downtown Chicago. Like Chicago police participate in vehicle chase, 2 car thieves dead at scene or something like that. And it's like, well, A, it's 3 times longer than it should be. B, if you're a news outlet, you don't say 2 car thieves dead. You say either 2 alleged car thieves or alleged hijackers, or you say 2 dead at scene. It's just not, it's like, it's not even like they didn't do research into how to write Cryons and write the news. It is like they never have heard of news before, which I guess tracks. These guys are probably like at best Fox News viewers and at worst like Breitbart dudes. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised they don't know what a real news station looks like, but it's still frustrating. And I just demand excellence from my movies, and it's sad when they fall short.
Yeah, it definitely did. So do you have an elevator pitch for Cooper Duper?
Yes, my elevator pitch is it is a Twin Peaks podcast for people, for regular people, for first-time viewers, for casual viewers. It is just Twin Peaks is a excellent show that is profoundly confusing very frequently. And I am married to a gentleman who loves Twin Peaks. It is his favorite piece of media. It is just something he saw the first episodes or the first season when he was way too young, and it genuinely, I think, fucked up his little mind. And so has sort of led to this lifelong, I think obsession is very strong, but passion for this. And I have seen Twin Peaks through a couple of times with him because we've been together for more than 10 years. And so during the pandemic, this got beyond the elevator speech. I'm just telling you about my podcast now. We're off the elevator. We're walking again.
Yeah, we're yeah. This is a very high up elevator.
Yeah, exactly. We're going down from the Sears Tower. So at the beginning of the pandemic, my husband and I, just to keep ourselves occupied, started doing bonus episodes of the Friendly Atheist podcast on our Patreon page of movies where people were trapped together. So it was like just sort of a quarantine-themed movie watching event. And we watched literally anything that fell under that umbrella. And we really liked it. It was just so much fun to just sit and bullshit with my husband for an hour and a half or 2 hours about whatever. It felt like a substitute for going out to dinner and talking. But like I said, like I was a lit major, so my favorite thing is to talk too much and in too much detail about some piece of art. And so I don't know how the idea of the Cooper Duper podcast happened, but we were like, you know what, fuck it. Like, let's do this project together. It will be fun. Like, it'll be low key. It will take up time, which was extremely important to us at the time. Because we started in like May of last year. So yeah, we have just been watching one episode at a time, and then immediately sitting down and discussing it, reading through the plot, discussing, trying to. So the idea is, if you listen to this podcast and you are confused about what's going on, because there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of plot lines, there's a lot of moving pieces, there's a lot of weird, supernatural and confusing shit. And so we thought, like, I thought I would understand the show better if I sat down and talked about it a lot. And I thought that would be a helpful thing for people. And it was just an excuse to do kind of a fun project with my husband. So now we are clear into the 3rd season, which is the final season that came out in 2017. And God, we're like actually like 5 episodes from the end. So I think we're going to keep going on the David Lynch train for a little while after that, but we might do them less frequently. But it's just been, we're losing money on the project because we pay for our hosting, but it's just a really fun activity that we do. And it's been a lot of fun. And I've learned how to do more audio editing, which I never learned how to do. And yeah, I really like watch along podcasts. I find them very fun for the reasons I told you earlier. Like I just want to listen to people like talk in depth about art because I'm pretentious. And so again, I try to make podcasts that I would like to listen to, and I like to think that I would listen to this podcast if I hadn't created it.
So did the new season that came out of Twin Peaks like work for your husband? Because it seemed like it came out, what was it, a year or so ago?
2017, so almost 4 years ago.
Really?
Yeah,
I've lost track, clearly.
Yeah, of course. So the interesting thing about Twin Peaks is that David Lynch, who's the creator, Mark Frost is co-creator. Mark Frost is the writer, David Lynch is the director, but they, I think, share some things. David Lynch's biggest woe of the original Twin Peaks series is that the network's kind of got in his way. He wanted to tell this really ethereal, weird story that was supposed to be about who killed. Oh God! If people don't know what Twin Peaks is, essentially it is the story of a tiny town called Twin Peaks in Washington, northern Washington, where the homecoming queen named Laura Palmer washes up dead one morning, and then they call the FBI in because there was another woman injured who crossed the international border. So it was an FBI thing. That was an important detail. Bring the FBI in, and Special Agent Dale Cooper, who's played by Kyle MacLachlan, and who is as good a character who's ever existed on television, is just a winning, charming, weird character who I adore. He comes in to investigate, and he's just this kind of kooky guy, and the town is kind of weird, and there's a lot of supernatural elements. And it's extremely dark. There's parts that are genuinely quite scary, but it's also very, very funny. It's just weird. It's just a weird show. So David Lynch's vision was, so this series is going to kick off with the murder of Laura Palmer. Who killed Laura Palmer was like their big marketing campaign. We're going to kick it off here. And eventually he didn't ever want to solve that murder. And he just wanted it to evolve into this like sort of study of this weird town and all these strange people and, their foibles and all that stuff. But this is in 1991. The ABC, the network, stepped in and was like, no, you have to fucking solve the murder. It's a murder mystery show. And so because of that, and because of just sort of the nature of network television, especially in the 90s, he did not really get to make the show that he wanted to. And you can see because he in network television, generally one person isn't going to direct the whole thing. And so you can see the episodes that he did, and he was trying to bring the show back on the rails, back on the story he wanted to tell. And, the network wasn't really helping him with that. So the show got canceled after season 2, and amassed this incredibly passionate fan following. People were and are utterly obsessed with it. Because there's no right answer. David Lynch is very strange, and he also has a very firm decision that he made for himself, that he's going to put his art out in the universe and not answer any more questions. Everything he wanted to say is on screen. So if you want to, you can ask him questions all you want. You can theorize all you want. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe that's not what he had in mind, but he likes that better. He famously, one of his first movies called Eraserhead, and a reporter said, I'm going to get this quote wrong, but you once said Eraserhead is the story of like dark and terrifying dreams. Would you care to expand on that? And he just said, no. My husband, what is it? It's a dream of dark and disturbing things. My husband had to pee just in time to correct me. Dark and disturbing things. Would you like to expand on that? And David Lynch just said, no. and that was the end of the interview. Like, he has no interest in going in depth on what it is and what's going on screen beyond what he put there. So when people approached him to try to continue the story of Twin Peaks, he was very much like, I will do this if it's me and Mark Frost, we get final cut, we get say in everything. And so Showtime gave him that space to do that. And then we're like, wait, this is weird and strange. And maybe should you do it like this? And he's like, no, fuck you. And they put it on ice for a year, because he's like, if you're not going to let me do exactly what I want to do, you can go fuck yourselves. I do not have to make this. I am doing this as a favor to you. Essentially, I might have editorialized there a little bit, but and so what resulted is in season 3, it's 18 episodes that are all directed by David Lynch, all written by David Lynch and Mark Frost, and deeply bizarre, so strange, and it's like there are scenes in it that are as funny as anything I've ever seen. There are things that are so deeply scary that I still think about them. But yeah, like the first time I watched season 3, I didn't get it. And arguably I still don't get it. And even further, arguably, there's nothing to get. It's all insanity. But yeah, Mikey loves David Lynch, and he just loves that kind of flavor of like auteur weirdness. And so he was over the moon. And a lot of people didn't like it. And I think those are people who were Twin Peaks fans and not David Lynch fans, that's not a criticism, because there can be two very different things. But yeah, he loved it. And rewatching it now, and I'm almost all the way through, there's some stuff that's weird and I don't get and makes no sense, and I don't know what we're going for. But David Lynch has a love of art that is kind of contagious. And if you kind of just take his weird journey with him, it's very fun. And then I get to sit down across from my husband, who knows a lot about David Lynch, and he can give me context of things I didn't get. And I can give him context of like, oh, this is a literary reference that might have kind of gone over your head and things like that. So I think we make a good team. It's something I'm proud of, and I love doing it. It's wildly unpopular, the podcast is, but that's okay. It's not, it's a passion project. It's just a fun hobby my husband and I do.
I was like, wildly unpopular. I think I can relate in that one. Since you are married, would you call yourself super straight?
These motherfuckers are just constantly trying to find ways to be asshole. Like, I will never in my life understand the instinct of somebody whose entire fucking jam is to like own the lib. So super straight is something that just came out. It's a product of like 4chan and the dark web. Of straight guys were getting mad, as they're wont to do, that when they said they were straight, that could possibly include trans women. And that was the worst thing they could think of. So again, you have to think of the level of concern these people have about what's going on in the world. And when they said, well, I date women, but only cis women, people were like, oh, that's pretty fucking transphobic of you. And they're like, A, it's not transphobic of me. It is. B, if I relabel myself from a straight guy who doesn't date trans women to super straight, I'm going to make myself a flag ? It's 2 blocks of color. And if we tell everybody that we are a legitimate sexuality, as are bi people and gay people, then if somebody tells us that we are, I don't know, if we're bad for saying we're super straight, then, well, we're a protected class, just like, a trans person is. So go fuck yourself. Anyway, hopefully that doesn't catch on. Yeah. It's just transphobia in disguise. It's just like, is it that much of a problem that these men feel like? I just do not understand it. I don't get it. I find it infuriating. I'm definitely on team live and let live. And for some reason, that seems to not be the default of people. It seems to be more of like, make sure you mold yourself to my view of the world or whatever. Anyway, I hate it. I hate it and I hate them.
Okay, so maybe you're not. So have you married anyone? You are a wedding officiant, according to
Oh,
bio.
I was like, well, we've been talking about my husband for like an hour. Yeah. I've officiated 3 weddings. The first one was my best friend from high school, Leah, and her wife Amanda. Both of them I'm very close to. That was in 2016. 2017, I officiated a couple friends of mine who just wanted a quick wedding that we went out. They lived in Rogers Park in Chicago, so we kind of went down to Lake Michigan, and it was just me. My husband took pictures. They each had a person, and that was it. And then most recently, my brother got married in 2019, and I officiated their wedding as well, which was the one I was by far the most nervous for. But I am proud to say all 3 marriages are still intact, so I'm 3 for 3. So in the future, I'm going to be very careful about who I marry, because if I think that marriage is going to fall apart, I do not need that on my record or on my conscience.
That's true. That's a good something to think about. So as someone who used to do stand-up, do you have like a go-to joke that you like to share?
No, I'm sorry. I don't. And if oh God. Okay. All right. I'll tell you what.
I knew it was there.
Well, I will tell you the first joke I ever wrote. I took if you're in Chicago and if you're interested in comedy, there's a program called FemCom, and it's for women who are interested in doing stand-up comedy. And so my husband I had bullshitted about doing stand-up for a long time. When I wrote on Hemant's site, I tend to write like funnier stuff. And it was just one of those like, one day I'm going to do stand-up and I'm going to be real good at it. And then finally my husband basically told me to put up or shut up in a nicer way, but he bought me this class. It's like this 8-week class, and it's just a group of all women taught by women to help you write your first 5-minute set, because that's the hardest thing in comedy. It's like writing your first 5 minutes, because it just feels insurmountable. And so they start you very easy, and so they give you some like joke structures and something to play around with, to give you like to just get your mind in the space of telling jokes. And so the first format they give us was, I like my blank the way I like my blank. So the first joke I wrote that I think is very funny and no man has ever laughed at is I like my uterus the way I like my calories empty.
Boom.
Yeah. To this day, no man has ever laughed at it. I did make Cameron Esposito listen to me tell it when I interviewed her, because it was really important for her to tell me I was funny. So
very important.
Very important to me. That's why I do this. It's for people to tell me how smart and funny I am. It's a disease.
So where can people find all your good content?
Well, you can, whatever podcatcher you use, you can look at Friendly Atheist podcast. We drop episodes on Fridays. Cooper Duper podcast is we drop on Thursdays. You can follow me on Twitter if you'd like. It's Jess Bluemke, JessBluemke. And that's all I got.
I think that's plenty. Well, thank you, Jessica, for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.